Thank you, musicians. Good time this morning. Let me tell you a little bit something about the song that Josh sang. That is a song that we will be hearing and even singing ourselves from time to time as we work through the book of Joshua, because I think that it is a song that is thematic of the big idea, one of the big ideas of the book of Joshua, and that's, as the nation of Israel really starts embracing no longer being slaves. Now, it's been, at the start of Joshua, it's been 40 years since they've been slaves in Egypt, but perhaps 40 years you could look at it as they've been slaves to the wilderness. It is just now that they're beginning to experience the fullness and freedom of being children of God. And so that's a song that will be thematic throughout our study and important to us to grasp this idea of the fullness of being children of God. No longer slaves to fear, no longer slaves to whatever you might come up with, whatever may be something that gets at us. And so it'll be an important song to us throughout this study. And so today we'll continue working through the book of Joshua, and we'll hone in chapter 2 here on how it is God accomplishes his purposes. And some of this may surprise us. It may be surprising as we get through this and look at some of the people he uses, the circumstances he uses, but also our expectations of what his purposes are. And I think you'll see that as we work through this chapter, the real idea of what his purpose is may just change in your mind, may just change in your understanding. So, Genesis chapter 2, as we start today, I'm just going to read verse 1, and then we'll work through the rest of it throughout our time together. Joshua 2, verse 1 says, "Then Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, 'Go view the land, especially Jericho.' So they went and came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab, and lodged there." Let's pray. Father, thank you for what we've read, for what we're about to read and go through today. We pray, Father, that we can all gain a good understanding of how it is that you accomplish your purposes, the people you use, circumstances you use, and your glory in it. Father, we want to be more like you. We want to embrace the fullness of our freedom in you. And our prayers that anyone here who does not know that freedom, as we speak right now, will come to know that freedom through surrendering their life to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So right off the bat, my friends, as we tackle this idea of God accomplishing his purposes, we see that he uses unexpected people. God uses unexpected people to accomplish his purpose. As Joshua sends out these 2 spies, we're not told who these spies are. Tradition kind of has it that maybe it's Caleb and the high priest Eleazar. But that's not really important. These 2 spies are told to go and look at the land. Go look at the land, and especially Jericho, because that's the first battle, so to speak, that they're going to have to fight, the first conquest they're going to get into after they cross the Jordan River. And so they've been in this place of preparation for 3 days as he sends them. And so I'm quite sure that these 2 spies have an expectation that when they get in the land, God is going to open some doors and make a way for them to spy out the land safely. And I'm sure that we as the readers, even as we read that first part of that verse, would have the expectation that God's going to make a way somehow for these spies to go do what they're asked to do and then return safely and give a report. Probably very few of us reading this for the first time. I mean, this is old news. You've read this chapter many times, so you knew what was coming. But put yourselves back in the shoes of reading it for the first time. Most people reading it for the first time would not expect that these spies are going to end up in a harlot's house, a prostitute's home, and that she is going to be the one that we'll eventually read about, that will give support and safety and aid as they are spying out the land. That could sound scandalous, especially in our day and time. That sounds very scandalous to think that these two men of God, these two spies, are taking refuge in the home of a harlot. Very much an unexpected person. We might expect a Melchizedek type that Abraham confronts, sees in the book of Genesis. And Melchizedek gives him some encouragement, a godly person who comes out of nowhere. Maybe like in the New Testament when Jesus sends his disciples into the town before him and says, hey, you'll find a donkey tied to a post. And the person there is like, oh yeah, go ahead. God, he's gone ahead and prepared these people. We might expect something like that. But instead, we find God using a prostitute. And we think, my goodness, what? God, that's kind of sticky, man. Why do you do stuff like this? Why do you use people like this? Look around. I'm not saying you look around and find an old prostitute, all right? But we all have our backstories, don't we? We all have the places we've been, the things we've done. We all have those stories. We are unexpected people that God uses. And it's not just us alone. You can go over to Hebrews, chapter 11, what we commonly refer to as that kind of faith hall of fame. You see all these names are mentioned here as triumphs of faith, as examples of great faith throughout the scriptures. You see Abel. Abel, we read nothing but good things about old Abel. Enoch walked with God. He lived his life in such a way that he was just taken up. He didn't even have to die. God just took him. He lived such a good life. But then we start seeing some names in this faith hall of fame. Noah. Remember what old Noah did when he got off the ark? He got drunk. Noah got drunk, but he's in the faith hall of fame. Abraham. Buzz mentioned our Wednesday night Bible study through the book of Genesis, and we've seen old Abraham now twice lie about his wife being his sister. Abraham's a liar, but he's in the faith hall of fame. Sarah, his wife, she laughed at God and encouraged Abraham to commit adultery. She's in the faith hall of fame. You go over, you see old Jacob in verse 20, he wrestled with God. Moses is a murderer. Look, even over there in verse 31, you see Rahab the harlot is in the faith hall of fame. Down to verse 32, you see Samson. My goodness. Philanderer, womanizer, David, adulterer, murderer. All these people are listed in the faith hall of fame. We might just expect, because we've heard their names, yeah, these are all, great, wonderful people who have no skeletons, have no surprises, because they're in the faith hall of fame. But we see, even as they are there, there's a reminder to us that God uses unexpected people. No one in their lives maybe would have looked around and said, all right, God's looking for someone to use. He's going to choose this one or that. There were probably plenty of other good people that people would have said God could choose and God would use. But God chooses the broken. He chooses broken people to use. So don't ever think that you're not in a position to be used by God just because of your brokenness. He uses unexpected. You just, and listen, it might not even be that you're coming from a place of brokenness. You might just be coming from a place of, I'm just me. I'm just ho-hum. I'm just average, everyday Joe. Could God even think about using me? Sure he could. Unexpected people God will use. And that's from a couple of different perspectives. I want to share a couple of stories from my own life about how God has used unexpected people, how the first one would even be us being unexpected people. One time when we were, years ago, we were first planting a church in Goldsboro. We were at a restaurant after church one Sunday, a Mexican restaurant in Pikeville. Pikeville was a little town right beside Goldsboro. And I don't think Benjamin was born yet, so it was myself, Kevin, Savannah, might have been a couple of people from church there with us. And as was customary, we started a conversation with the waitress and told her, we were going to pray before we ate anything we could pray about for her. And that just began a conversation throughout the meal. As every time she would come back, she would ask questions and talk more. We were just really engaging more in a gospel conversation with her. But guess what God was doing? God's purpose, we might have thought, was in our conversation with this girl. And we might have thought he was using us to have conversation with this waitress. But his purpose was a kid that was sitting at a table across the restaurant. And he was about 16, 17 years old. And he was listening to this. We had no clue. And it moved him so much that he got up, and when he was done with his meal, and he came over and he said, I've been listening to your conversation. Now, he was already a Christian, but he said, I've never seen anything like, I've never seen Christians being like this, talking like this. That's what I want. That's what I want to be like. And so he started coming to our church. But the big idea, I think, what I'm getting at is we weren't expecting that. We were the unexpected people. He was just coming to get lunch. We thought we were talking to this girl, but God had other things in store for this young man. But also then, over the next couple of years, as he and his family started coming to our church, he had two brothers and his mom, and the dad, the husband, was what you might call a deadbeat dad. And over the next couple of years, I believe we really came to see what was the purpose of that day. And that was for us as a church to walk beside this family as they went through the roughest couple of years of their lives. And so, unexpected people used in that situation, unexpected purposing. And then in my own life, as I think about my call to ministry, God used a couple different people in my family that I would never have expected to confirm my call to ministry. I haven't always thought that I was going to be a preacher, right? Kim didn't marry a preacher. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, right? I'll sell you some damage waiver right now, right? But that wasn't part of the deal when we got married. After we got married, moved to North Carolina, and it was during that time that I first sensed a call from the Lord into ministry. And it was a sense, it was a thing, it was, that's interesting. Never thought of that before. And told Kim that, told my dad, and my dad shared it with his dad, who was dying at the time. So my dad's dad, my granddaddy Baber, we'll call him. That's what I call him. But he was dying of congestive heart failure. And this was a man who, as far as I know, he divorced my grandmother when my dad was 12 years old. And, he became a better father when my dad was grown than he was when my dad was young. Everyone admits that. As far as I know, my granddaddy Baber never went to church as an adult. He had plenty of Bibles. He was one who, his dad was a preacher. He was one who confessed Jesus as Savior, was baptized, and had all these Bibles, and you could tell he read them. But he never went to church. There just weren't many fruits of the Spirit, you might say, in his life. There was no evidence. He didn't serve any other people. He didn't, just wasn't him. The day before he died, he wrote me a letter. He was on his deathbed. It wasn't a surprise. He knew he was dying. And it was a handwritten letter that he wrote to me. And in this letter, he didn't say, God, I can see that God has called you to ministry. He said, you said that perhaps God is calling you to ministry. You better carefully consider that. That was kind of the tone of his letter. But what it did was make it so that it was something that I couldn't just put on the back burner forever. It was something that it kept it in my mind. I had to start thinking about it. Now, so this was my grandfather who never went to church, and God moved him to write this letter to have me keep this call to ministry in my mind. If you had asked me which of my grandfathers would send me a letter about pastoral ministry, it would have been my mom's dad. It would have been my granddaddy, the one who took me to church every Sunday from the time I was born, the one who loved to tell the story of buying me my first winter coat that cost more than his winter coat, the one who loved his wife and loved his children from the time he got married until the time he drew his last breath, the man who served faithfully as a deacon in the church, the man who I was sitting beside in church when I professed Jesus as my Lord and Savior, the one who I poked him and said, Granddaddy, what should I say? The man who faithfully served in Sunday school, the man who I remember when I was a teenager, he was sitting down, we were sitting down on the front porch, and he looked at me and he said, you know, there's a couple of girls your age that haven't surrendered their life to Jesus. Tell me how I should approach them and talk to them about that. If you had asked me which granddaddy would have wrote me a letter or would have said something to me about your call to pastoral ministry, that's the one I would have chosen. That's the one I would have expected. But God chose to use the one that would never have crossed my mind. And then, a couple of years later, God used another family member who was living a lifestyle that was far, far, far from God. As we were all home for Christmas, living hours apart from each other, not having much conversation. It's still at this point that the people who knew of the struggle, the wrestling with the call to ministry were just my wife and my parents. But this family member, living far, far, far from God, came to me and said, tell me something. Have you been struggling with God regarding the call to ministry? I'm like, what? How did you know that? And she said, it just had a sense. I mean, and this, I promise, I'm not going to get into all the details, but understand me when I tell you, I promise you, this person was far, far from God at that time. These are the people that God chose to reinforce to me what he was doing. Unexpected people. And friends, the point of that, the idea for this is to remind us and help us to get the idea that God can use anyone he chooses to accomplish his purposes. God can use believers, God can use non-believers, God can use people who are, you know, if we were to look at it, we'd say, are they a believer or not? I don't know. But as the creator of all, he can use whoever he wants. But also it's important to understand not only can he use whoever he wants, but he can save whoever he wants. He can save the harlot. He can save whatever sexual immoralities beside harlotry you think of, whatever addictions you can think of, whatever laziness you can think of. I mean, all of these, wherever you come from, God can use you, and he can use you because he wants to show you that he can save you as well. Unexpected people God will use to accomplish his purposes. As we work our way through this chapter, you'll see in verses 15 through 24 kind of the end of this story as the spies end up with Rahab and stay at her house, and then she kind of carries through a plan. We may read that in a minute, we'll see. But as we look at verses 2 and 3, we see that God accomplishes his purposes amidst opposition. it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. So you see, when the spies get into Rahab's house, word quickly gets to the king of Jericho that, hey, there are spies here. There are spies here. And he tries to root them out by sending to Rahab's house and saying, hey, where are these guys? Where are these guys? Friends, as Christians, as the church, we should just wake up every day with the expectation of opposition to the Christian message, to the Christian mission. We should just expect that there's opposition, that you are going to face opposition as an individual every day trying to live biblically. We should just expect that as a church, we are going to face opposition as we try to carry out our mission and our purpose that God has laid out for us. We should just expect that because that's what Satan has been doing from the get-go. Satan was cast out of heaven because he opposed God's rule. He opposed God's glory. He wanted it for himself. His whole thing is opposition to God and his mission. And so he's cast out of heaven and he cast to the earth. Guess what he has continued to do on the earth? Oppose God's mission. And so this is what he's always done. This is what he continues to do. That's what's going on right here in verses 2 and 3 as he uses this king of Jericho to oppose God's mission. Now, it's up to us then, as we expect to encounter opposition, to discern exactly what it is that God is trying to accomplish through that opposition. I'm not saying in any way that all opposition we see is God-authored, but God allows it, and we've got to figure out what's going on here. Why is God allowing this opposition to what it is I believe he's calling me to accomplish? Sometimes God allows opposition, and we'll call it closed, we'll use doors, the open or closed doors metaphor, okay? Sometimes when a door is closed, there's opposition. God is closing that door because he's opened another door that he wants us to go through. Sometimes we might think that this is where I'm supposed to be going. This is the door I'm supposed to be going through. But if that door is closed, it just may be that God is trying to get us to look over here. And there's a door that he's opened. But I have to be able to discern that, hear that, understand that from God. Sometimes we come and we get to the closed door, opposition to whatever it is we believe God is calling us to. And we've got to be able to discern, is the door closed simply because God wants me to back up from that closed door and wait? To wait and hear. Because yes, I'm eventually supposed to go through that door. Eventually God is calling me to go through that door, but guess what? I'm not ready yet for what's on the other side. I'm not ready for that yet. And maybe God in his wisdom has closed the door to protect me from getting hurt on what's the other side. Maybe he's closed the door to get me ready so that when I get on the other side, I won't make a mess of what he has waiting for me. So sometimes the door is closed because I need to wait and be prepared for what's on the other side. Sometimes then, the door is closed. God allows the door to be closed. He allows this opposition to rise up and make life difficult seemingly, simply because I'm not supposed to walk through that door. It's not about this door is open or I'm waiting. It's just because this door is closed. It's never going to open, and there's not another one open right now. You're where I want you to be. You're where I need you. You serve me. You run as hard as you can for me right here, right now, where I have you. And if another door opens at some point, then you'll see it. But right now, I just need you to be faithful in the midst of the opposition. I need you to be faithful in the midst of the storm. without knowing that I'm getting you ready to go through that door later, without knowing that there's another door open over here. Sometimes he just calls us to be faithful in the midst of opposition without any idea of what's happening next. All I know is that he's called me to be faithful in the midst of everyone fighting against me right now. Sometimes that's what all we have to go with. And when those times come up, we ought to praise God for giving us that clear message. But be faithful in the face of opposition whenever it arises. As we move on, we'll see God accomplishes his purposes using unexpected means. So get to verse 4. So remember, the king is sent to Rahab and said, hey, you got spies here, give them to me. Verse 4, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to Jordan, to the fords, and as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. So you get the picture of what happened there. People come to Rahab's house, they say, hand over the guys. She's like, yes, some guys are here, but they're not here anymore, right? They're gone. And so she sent the men away, the other men away, and they went chasing. Now the reality is, she had hidden the spies up on a roof, right? Laying in the flax, in the grain, the wheat, the stalks, or whatever. So they were up there hiding. So what did Rahab actually lied. She lied to these guys. Now, this passage has caused a lot of debate. A lot of people have written papers, and people have probably done doctoral theses on this passage. Is it ever right to lie? Is it ever acceptable to lie? It's kind of the topic of debate here, because what they see is Rahab lied. And it seems like God uses it. Some people would say God approves of it because nothing happened. And we'll see what later happens to Rahab. That there seems to be no consequence. God used it actually to protect these spies. Now, and people, well, that's not right. You should never lie. And there'll be other people who take this out. Well, if someone breaks into my house and says, "Where are your kids?" I'm going to lie about it. So sometimes it is right to lie. The big idea that we want to walk away with is, I think, that we have a Romans 8:28 principle going on here. Okay? Let's go over there and look at that real quick just to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So Romans 8:28 tells us that in the midst of a fallen world, in the midst of a world that is filled with sin, in the midst of a world that every person born has the sin DNA in us that has come from Adam, in the midst of that, God allows mankind to make our choices, to do the things that we're going to do, to decide the things we're going to decide, and then he works amidst that, among that, with that, in spite of that, however you want to phrase it, to accomplish his plan. Okay? And so what we see here is that Rahab decided on her own, not led by God. God didn't get down in her ear and say, hey, Rahab, you need to lie in this situation. God didn't do that. Rahab chose on her own volition to lie in this situation. Now, having lied, God decided that he would use that. It's as we talked about. God uses sinful people, right? We've already seen that. The Faith Hall of Fame is filled with sinful people. God uses that then to carry it out and protect the spies so that they will not be killed. And we'll see a bigger reason that he protects them in a moment. And so the principle here is that, listen, whatever we do, whatever choices we make in life, God is still going to accomplish his purpose. God is still going to do what he sets out to do. He's going to use our good choices, and he'll use our bad choices if he needs to use our bad choices. Does that mean that when we make bad choices, there are no consequences? No. Absolutely, there are consequences when we sin. We have to assume that Rahab, even though we don't read about it, there are some consequences to her life. We just have to assume it because God is consistent, and we believe that about God. And so, the fact is that God will use these different means, these different ways. What someone may intend for harm, God can turn around and use it for good. He can do that. We've experienced some of that. We've seen how sometimes church people, hadn't happened here yet, hopefully never, but sometimes church people they can go rogue, right? They can start talking about the pastor, they can say stuff and mean it for harm, but God turns around and uses it for good. Some people at our last church meant some stuff for harm, but God turned around and used it to give us a 2-month sabbatical, 2 months of rest before we came and started ministering and serving with you guys. It was just what we needed. Just what we needed. And so we see, and probably all of us can think of times where, there's seemingly all these bad things happening, people making sinful choices, but God somehow gets in there and still uses it to accomplish his purposes. Now, this is not a license to go and live and how we want to live. Because, someone can sit here and think, well, my goodness, if it doesn't really matter what I'm going to do and God's going to accomplish his purposes anyway, I'll just go and make all the bad choices and live to my flesh. Live the way I want to live and let God figure it out. Well, Paul addresses that just a couple chapters before Romans chapter 8, Romans chapter 6, and where he kind of says, shall sin abound? Shall we sin even more so that grace can abound? And he says, may it never be. May it never be. Don't do that. Don't do that. We are saved to live the fruitful life, not saved to live the old fleshly life. But God, even when we make those bad choices, will work to accomplish his purposes. We see that right here with Rahab. Now, verses 8 through 14, we get to what I believe is the number one purpose of this chapter. The number one purpose that God has set out to accomplish by sending these spies into the land and sending these spies to Rahab's house. We're going to see here that the main reason he sent them was not to get some intelligence on the people who were defending or living in the promised land. It wasn't about that at all. Verse 8, now before they lay down, she, Rahab, came up to them on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you, when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. And it shall come about, when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Let's go over to verse 15. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. She said to them, go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way. The men said to her, we shall be free from this oath to you, which you have made us swear, unless when we come into the land you tie this cord of scarlet thread in the window through which you let us down, and gather to yourself into the house your father and your mother and your brothers and all your father's household. It shall come about that anyone who goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be free. But anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be free from the oath which you have made us swear. She said, according to your words, so be it. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Friends, I want you to understand that God's great purpose in sending these spies into the land was not so that they could come back as they do at the end of the chapter and say to Joshua, hey, the land of Jericho, the promised land, it's ours. God has given it to us. God already told them that. They didn't come back with any new news. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose was Rahab's confession of faith. The purpose of these spies going in was so that Rahab could say out loud to somebody that the Lord your God, He is the God of heaven and the God of earth. And in fact, the Lord your God, He is my God. He's my. She wasn't born Jewish. She wasn't of the people of Israel, but she heard about the Lord their God drying up the Red Sea, conquering kings on the behalf of the Israelites. And she said, that is the real living God. Just like that song that Josh sang. Rahab's heart was crying out. Her soul was crying out that the Lord your God, He split the Red Sea for me. He split the Red Sea for me to walk through. Did Rahab walk through the Red Sea? No, she wasn't over there. She probably wasn't even alive then. But as real as it was for the people who walked through that Red Sea, it was real for her spiritually. As real as it was for them, it's real for you and I spiritually. You see, when God split that Red Sea, when God defeated those kings, when God did the plagues on Pharaoh, everything that you read about in these scriptures, they involved people of that day and of that time. But as much as He did it for them, He did it for me and for you. He did it so that we would know that He is the God of heaven and the God of earth, the one and only God. You see, He had Rahab in mind when He split that Red Sea. Do you get that? Do you understand that? He had you in mind when He split that sea, because He wanted you to believe the kind of God that He is. Now, I want you to see something even greater about God's purpose here. As we've said, it wasn't even primarily about Israel's salvation, so to speak, as they were about to cross the Jordan and come and be saved out of the wilderness. It was even more about Rahab's salvation. But then even beyond Rahab's salvation, as I've just started talking about, it was about our salvation. And more than looking back at the Red Sea, but looking to the one who would be part of the lineage of Rahab. Because you see, this harlot that makes it to the Faith Hall of Fame back there in Hebrews chapter 11, she also appears in Matthew chapter 1. Verse 1 says, the record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. And Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David, the king. And you keep on reading, and you'll see this lineage, just as verse 1 tells us, ends up with Jesus, King Jesus. And so his, I don't know how many great-grandmothers was Rahab. Rahab was the great-great-grandmother of King David. This harlot, this prostitute, God chose to be in the lineage of the Messiah who would die for you and die for me and be resurrected from the grave to have victory over death. Rahab, the harlot. Incredible. Incredible that God would choose to use her. No more incredible than that God would choose to use Lewis, the Enterprise Rent-A-Car management assistant. Jimmy, the copier guy. Ken, the best chicken seller in the world. Put your name in there. You know, it's no more amazing that he chose Rahab than him choosing you. What purposes does God have in mind to accomplish through you? What unexpected people does he have in mind for you to have encounters with in order to bring him glory? What unexpected means will he use? And how does he want you to respond to that opposition? But just know, his desire is to use you. No matter where you come from, no matter what you've done, no matter what you think your qualifications are, he will qualify you. He will equip you. He will use you to accomplish his purpose. No matter how crazy you might think it sounds, he will do it. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you.